Go ahead and open our meeting today. So the first order of business is to review the minutes from last minute meeting. Just to recap the materials in front of you, you do have the minutes and as well as a packet having to do with our long-range planning model, as well as the agenda for tonight. And then there's a second packet there with the questions. Aaron had sent out, kindly sent out some preliminary answers, and we'll do that. So. It's probably worth acknowledging that Tom is here this evening for his first meeting as our new FinCom member. So welcome. Any discussion on the minutes?
You ready?
Yep, I'll entertain a motion.
I'd move to approve the minutes of August 27th.
I'll second it.
Motion been made and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Unanimous, BJ. All right, Aaron, would you, why don't you and Gary come up, and if you wouldn't mind enlightening us. So just a couple things, sort of some, I guess, explanation of, we have invited Aaron to come here, and I had asked Aaron to go ahead and bring someone from Stantec if made sense to do so. Obviously, Gary's here to do that. So, my name is Ken Estabrook. I chair the Finance Committee, and you see the other members here with name tags and so forth. I guess I better. So the role of the Finance Committee is to work on behalf of town meeting voters to gather information. We don't really have a formal role in this particular process. But because we do work on behalf of town meeting voters to gather information, understand the issues before town meeting, we thought it'd be a good idea to talk about the Powder Mill Place project. And so the output of this process will likely be a set of concerns that we might send to the Board of Selectmen for them and others to respond to us on behalf of town meeting. So, you know, again, I'm just trying to clarify our role in this. We don't have a formal role in the process other than acting on behalf of town meeting voters to try to understand, and that's what we're doing. When we discussed this, we talked about how far that we would go in our sort of examination of the issues, and we felt as though because other areas of the town administrator, the DPW, and others, the Board of Selectmen, are already looking at a number of the issues that we were not going to get into those. But the sewer, because there are so many questions, it's fairly complex system for us to understand. We thought it would make sense for us to do that. I would guess that this is the first of multiple meetings where we, the Finance Committee, will be talking about this to gather information. And certainly we're focused on the sewer system for the reason I explained. That's the one that we seem to have a lot of questions of, and hence why we had invited you here. We'll probably not get into other issues unless we find that there, over time, that there are significant issues, financial issues that come to our attention there. So let's talk about what this is not. This is not a public hearing. It's not a forum for input to the Board of Selectmen and other bodies. This is for the Finance Committee to have an opportunity to talk to members of the town government to to ask questions and so forth. So we, the Finance Committee, will be asking questions. I expect that we'll have time at the end, if there are people in the audience that have questions of the Finance Committee, just want to emphasize that, then certainly feel free to come up when recognized, to come up and ask a question of the Finance Committee. I guess the one last note is this meeting is being recorded. I requested the meeting be recorded so that people who couldn't attend tonight would have a chance to hear the discussion going on. I want to thank Greg, our town administrator, for arranging it, and Michael from WAVM being here this evening with us to record the meeting on behalf of those who couldn't be here. And I guess just to sort of close out the introduction, obviously next Monday is when the Board of Selectmen is hosting their information night at 7:30 in the high school auditorium. And so people certainly be able to attend that. And so Aaron, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and Gary, and then we can sort of get started on the question part.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. My name is Aaron McCloskey, the Director of Public Works for the Town of Maynard. Joining me this evening, Gary McCarthy is a principal at Stantec Consulting. They are the Town of Maynard's water and sewer consultants.
Okay. I guess, so I would draw attention to the FinCom members that you had responded in writing, and I gotten these late this afternoon. I'd forwarded them out, so thank you for doing that. I suspect that most of us probably have not had a chance to go through them thoroughly, and so you know, certainly as we're asking the questions, you can feel free to refer to the notes if there are things that we can sort of read along. So I guess, you know, just to start, we were wondering what assessments that you had done, Stantec had done, other people had done, on the current capacity of the wastewater treatment plant and the sewage collection system. And it might be worth sort of explaining for those of us who maybe aren't as technically proficient in what that is. There's obviously different capacities. The wastewater treatment plant may have one capacity, and the collection system have different capacities and different components. I know, you know, some pipes are pumped under pressure and others are gravity fed and things like that. I'm sure different components have different ages. Some of them are very old, others may be relatively new, so that might be worth doing. But just in terms of sort of the overall capacity of the system, the wastewater treatment plant, the sewage collection system, as you take a look at the system, how much of a burden, and you could talk about it in a narrative way, but maybe a percentage way as well, would, you know, be needed to accommodate this proposed project?
Yeah, absolutely. So over the last year, the Town of Maynard has completed a number of assessments on the sewer system, concentrating primarily on the sewer collection system from this proposed development on Powder Mill Road, leading down to the lift station on Powder Mill Road, on the forest main under the river.
What's a lift station?
Yeah, so I'll go through a little bit of detail on each piece of the component.
Sure.
First, back in 2017 in August, and if you refer to question A, that first paragraph right there, sewer collection system, the Town of Maynard worked with the developer and Stantec, and Stantec completed a closed circuit TV inspection of the sewer main that's a collection system underground. So essentially, leading from the Powder Mill Place property down Powder Mill Road to, we have a lift station, which is a pump station. It's basically a wet well with pumps that send the sewer underground under pressure to a higher elevation. So we assessed that section of sewer main on Powder Mill Place. Stantec completed a CCTV inspection. They provided recommendations. The recommendations are listed in detail in the report entitled Review of Powder Mill Place Development 2412 18 Powder Mill Road, Acton, Massachusetts. 112, 114, 116, 118 Powder Mill Road, Maynard, Massachusetts. Massachusetts Sewer Impact Analysis and Condition Assessment recommendations. That report is provided on the Town of Maynard website, on the Powder Mill Place information page. So essentially, the recommendations of that were to reline that. Overall, the collection system does have the capacity to handle that proposed development's flow, the 42,000 gallons a day, if specific improvements are made. And those improvements included relining sections of pipe, excavation and replacement of sections of pipe, upsizing certain sections of pipe. That assessment concluded at that point at the lift station and didn't look at the lift station itself. So that was done in August, and no action had really been taken. That information was shared with the developer, and we didn't really hear back any kind of peer review from them until we most recently saw, I think, the MOA listed $450,000 as one of their contributions to those repairs. The next step that was taken was a few months ago, the town of Maynard looked at the lift station itself. So there's a lift station behind, I think it's a Middlesex Bank location. And what that does is it collects all the sewer from that area of town into a wet well and then pumps that under pressure underneath the river, underneath the Assabet River, to another section of collection system, sewer main on the opposite side of the river, and that then flows to the wastewater treatment facility. So that assessment was done. The details of that are under question C, the second paragraph, and provide recommendations essentially that, while currently the force main works, it's operational, it has some capacity, additional capacity available. The recommendation due to the age would be to install a second force main to provide that redundancy, and then do some improvements and inspection on the current force main so that we have increased capacity for additional flow and also a redundancy under the river.
Sorry, the force main is the pipe, is the pressurized pipe going under the river?
That's correct.
Thank you.
The third assessment that was done was actually done just this last week, and that was done by Veolia Water North America. Veolia Water is our O&M operations and maintenance contractor. They run the wastewater treatment facility for the town of Maynard. They've been at that facility for, this is their 4th year now in their 2nd contract. We have a 5-year contract with them. So they did an initial assessment of that facility and determined that overall we do have some additional capacity based on what we're allowed to discharge into the river from our discharge permit. And operationally, we would be able to handle some additional capacity, and that includes the 42,000 gallons a day that this facility is anticipated to discharge into our system. But what we did find was that our currently the way that the plant is operating, and if you refer to question C, the 3rd paragraph, well, we do have some additional capacity. Looking at the influent data, which is basically the inflow coming into the plant, is operating above the actual design of that facility, which means we're seeing more suspended solids. It's more fats, oils, and grease than what that plant was actually designed to run at what level. But we're still able to process that waste efficiently and meet our permitting requirements and discharge it at levels below whatever we were required by our permit to discharge into the river. So it's running well, but what VLA does recommend is that we do a condition assessment of that facility to look at specific conditions to determine that we will be able to continue to run that way long term.
So the discharge, the capacity of the wastewater treatment plant is dependent on a variety of factors. And these are just the ones I know about. I'm sure there are many more. But you have a permit that allows you a certain capacity.
Correct.
And then there's the actual capacity of the plant, which might be different things. It might be a different level. You're allowed at one level, and yet the design capacity of the plant is at a different level. Mm-hmm. And then you also have operating history that as you're going through and you're looking to see actual performance, then you look at what the theoretical capacity would be and then what the actual performance capacity is.
Correct.
So are there other
so-
things that I might be missing?
So our permitted capacity, we're allowed to discharge 1.45 million gallons per day. That's a 365-day average. We're currently just under that at around what did I put down here? I think 94, this would be 940,000 gallons per day. The increase from this facility, it would be essentially 2.89% increase. So we'd still be under our permitted capacity for a daily flow. But looking at the water quality itself coming into the plant was not designed per the O&M manual to handle that level of water, but we're handling it. So there's been a number of upgrades throughout the years, and we think that, you know, a deeper analysis into what the actual O&M and what the actual level of processing that plant can handle should be looking into a little further.
Can I ask what it was designed for in terms of capacity?
It's a max capacity of 2 million gallons per day, but that's about a rolling average of 1.45 million gallons per day.
But that's
so
what
you can
we're-
have kind of like a peaks and valley.
Yep. But 1.45 is what you said we're now
Permitted.
Well, we're permitted to.
permitted, and
So
that's
there's-
what it was designed for as well?
Or, yeah, what was the plant designed for?
2 million.
Wow.
It's capable of handling 2 million gallons per day.
So when you make the statement that it's wasn't designed for the inflow purity, how do we translate that in terms of capacity? I'm not sure I.
That's why we need to look at it a little bit further to determine what level of how efficient the plant is at processing that waste, right? It can handle the volume, but it might not be able to handle certain qualities and bring it down to a certain level.
So when you build a plant, the plant has a certain capacity theoretically.
Right.
And then the actual performance in terms of how much stuff, you know, fats and so forth that people are putting into the stream, then you get the actual performance capacity to see, and you're having to test the output to see whether it's actually getting treated up to a certain level. And if it's not performing, then theoretically, someone could come back and say, yeah, this is, you know, you have a permit for 1.45, but you're not actually hitting your targets in terms of cleanliness of what your discharge is.
Yeah, there's two components to the permit. One is the hydraulic quantity, which is the 1.45 million gallons per day. But then there's a lot of parameters that are required on the quality side. And I think what Aaron was trying to say is that the quality of the water coming in is maybe higher than what was anticipated, but the plant is performing very well and meeting its permit.
Yeah.
And treating the water well. So there's some built-in extra capacity, performance capacity in the plant. There's built-in quantity capacity as well, because it could handle up to 2 million gallons per day.
Right.
But
And it actually can probably handle more than that due to significant rain events, but that's typical that it would be oversized like that.
But does that mean the quality of the sewer coming from Maynard is dirtier than was expected? Or what are the performance? I'm trying to get to that, I think.
Yeah, I'm not, well, I don't know the details of the plant. It's operated by Veolia, but that's what I understand, is that they found that maybe the quality of the water is maybe it's stronger wastewater than what was originally anticipated. I'm not sure if there's some particular users that are influencing that, but that's one of the things that they'll do with their plant, is to understand the performance of the plant to try and get a better handle on that. I don't think it's anything to be, I mean, these plants are built with belts and suspenders and ropes. It's lots of redundancy is built in order to make sure that it can handle the.
Do you have a different understanding or anything to add to that?
I agree with that. And actually, I just received a detailed report from Veolia that goes into more detail on what they found and what their recommendations are, and that's going to be provided to this committee as well as the general public.
So I want to just go back to, the reason why I was asking is, in terms of our determining sort of a risk, you know, the risk to the capacity, there's what the theoretical capacity of the system is, and that has various components to it, the wastewater treatment plant, the collection system, and so forth. and then there's a permitted capacity, and then there's actual performance capacity. And the capacity of the system could change if you have a major breakdown of the wastewater treatment plant. Well, then that could affect the actual capacity of the system. Or if the Commonwealth all of a sudden came and said, based on our experience, we want to change your capacity, they could adjust the capacity up or down based on various factors. We don't know what would happen 10 years from now and what laws, get changed, 10 years from now. And then there's the performance capacity, which would be, what the actual output is and the testing that gets done. And there may be other things. Like I said, those are just three that I know of, but there may be other factors. And so that's why I was, in terms of us sort of saying, here are the risks that we're concerned about, are there other areas around capacity of the system that we should be concerned about?
So I think the three major ones, from my viewpoint, are the collection system on the street, which we've provided a report on what the recommendation should be to kind of mitigate that risk. The second is the force main and the lift station, which again, we've provided that report with those details, recommendations. And then the third is the one we just received, the preliminary from Veolia, which does recommend that we do a further condition assessment. And I'm recommending that, the town moves forward with a condition assessment, not only for this, will help us for this project, but also long-term capital planning. And that's so that piece would be an unknown level of risk.
So would you say that we wouldn't proceed until we have that report in hand?
Well, I would like to see some type of an assessment done, and I don't think that's anything that's too complicated, or wouldn't be, take too long to complete, maybe a couple of months. But I don't think that would necessarily hold up moving forward with these other recommendations and assessments. Their initial, the 2% is a very small number, and Veolia did come back and say that they think that the plant could physically handle that increase.
The 2% you're referring to is the 2% increase that this project would represent?
Correct.
Okay.
Of our permitted capacity. And they feel confident that they would be able to process that increase. And what I had them look at too was the anticipated output from this project, the 120 to Parker Street, and then some other smaller residential projects as well that are in town. So they looked at all of that increase.
So that's actually where I want to go here before we do. So you just made a statement. They looked at the other projects that are in town?
Correct.
So what projects would that be that they are considering? The ones that are currently on the books?
So I included the 120 to Parker Street
Right.
output numbers, and then there was two smaller residential projects that are, I think, still in the planning process downtown that are 27 unit apartment buildings.
So these are ones that are currently in the pipeline, not other theoretical development like.
I mean, they're not guaranteed. They're just in the planning process, and 27
Right.
units together is pretty significant, I felt, so I included those numbers as well.
But it's not, there are other tracts of land that could be developed at some point in the future, and their assessment didn't include
Correct.
those, okay?
Correct.
So the 2.89%, I think that's what you said,
Yeah,
is inclusive of 129, and no, it's
No.
not.
no, that's just this
That's just this
project.
project.
So when you said it was considered, I'm sorry, I'm not catching on very fast, but when it was considered, these other projects were considered.
I had them consider those other projects when they were providing this memo
Yeah,
for their recommendations on doing a condition assessment and if they were able to handle this increased capacity.
okay.
And then separately from that, on the question and answer sheet that I provided to the FinCom, the bullet points under A, the second paragraph, I just list the numbers. There's a 12-month current average flow. This is the 0.94 million gallons a day. That's our current flow. The anticipated additional flow from the proposed project, the 0.042 million gallons a day. That's just the Powder Mill Place project. Our permitted capacity is 1.45 million gallons a day, and then Powder Mill Place project is just the 2.89.
So just to make sure we're clear, so you took the current usage of the system, added the other projects you know about, and then you added this project that was 2.89%. And they said, based on what we're currently doing, what projects we have on the books, plus this one, it would be within the capacity.
Correct.
But any other development that might come into the town, they were not considering in their assessment.
Correct.
Okay.
Can you, The lift station, behind Middlesex, you looked at what's the capacity of that? What does the additional 42,000 gallons? So I guess aside from the force main issue, the lift station itself, I assume, has a capacity.
Correct.
And what are the what share of that would this project be?
I can comment on that. So our company did an assessment of the pump station, mostly the force mains, but we did look at the capacity of the pumps. And one thing that I noted in the assessment that our engineers did is that pump station sees almost 80% of the entire flow in the town. Most of the flow, 80% of the flow comes to that location and then is conveyed, pumped across the river to the wastewater plant.
I'm sorry, you said 8 or 80?
80. So the addition of this project, along with the 129 project, it's a pretty small increase to that total. So, and that I know there's at least two major pumps there that have sufficient capacity and excess capacity for the flow.
So that current system that takes underneath the river, I've heard various age estimates from various sources on that. How old is that system, that part of the system?
The force main was constructed in 1984, and that at that time it replaced an original. I'm not exactly sure how old that one was, but it replaced a force main that was there previously.
And you're recommending a second, almost identical one?
We're recommending two things. One is to put in a second pipe, like you just said, adjacent to the first one. And then once that's online and operating, to go in and reline and rehab the existing pipe, so that now we've got two to choose from, so we can shut one down if necessary.
Can you talk a little bit about the relining of the pipe? What's the difference? What does relining the pipe do? I'm assuming they're putting a pipe inside the old pipe?
Correct.
Doesn't that cut down the capacity of that?
It's a very thin liner that gets installed, so the pipe gets taken offline, gets cleaned, and they use a special fabric. It's a sock, basically, that they can push through the pipe, and they use heated water to then cure the liner, and it's very, very thin. It maybe takes a quarter inch or more of the existing space that's there, but it then becomes a pipe within a pipe.
What kind of conditions of that would make that relining not work? I assume that, if it's that thin, it's requiring the pipe then to be solid. So if there's a crack in the pipe or broken portions of the pipe, would you be able to use that for relining for that portion?
Yeah, a crack in the pipe is not an issue at all. That's most of the reason why we would do lining. When you get to bends, we can't do a lining there, so it has to be excavated in that location and replacement of pipe, replacement of the bends. But on the straight sections of pipe, it can be done. It's a great way for us to to rehab a pipe without having to excavate. So particularly in that location, it's much less expensive, is little to no impact to the environment because we're not excavating in the waterway.
And then, sorry, this is talking about relining the existing force main.
That's correct.
Separately, in the MOA and in other places, there's been discussion of replacing or relining the 2,000 linear feet of sewer main. That's under the road, though. That's a separate
correct.
project.
Yes.
Can I ask, can you talk about the relining versus replacement on that 2,000 feet? And, I mean, is some of it so bad that we have to replace it? Are there a
Correct.
lot of bends in it, or what's determining what's relined versus replaced? And would we be better asking that it's all replaced?
It's a good question, and based on the videotapes that were done in the pipe, we're able to see where the pipe may have some issues. If it's got simple cracks, then that's a location that we would look to line the pipe. If there's breaks in the line, or if there's maybe tree roots that are coming into the pipe, or other more severe like collapses of a pipe, we don't want to line that. We want to excavate and replace that section. And so relining a pipe is a very effective and long-term solution. There's no reason to excavate the road and replace the pipe if we think we can line it.
So if you reline, that presumes that capacity pipe is right for that particular part of town. Now,
That's
I
correct.
guess where I'm going is, that particular part of town is commercially zoned. You could see there being development in that area over the next, 10, 20, 25 years. Is it currently, did you say it was 8 inches currently?
I think
8-inch
it is. I
Yeah,
think it is,
yeah, most of it's 8. There's one section that we're proposing to upsize to a 12.
And what would, you're basing that recommendation to upsize it based on what?
So we did, Stantec performed, created a sewer model of that entire roadway. They looked at what properties were connected to the pipe and what outflows we were receiving from those properties. Also looked at proposed the vacant properties. That's detailed in the Stantec report. And on the last page, it shows what they're recommending section to section, whether it's a reline, a replacement, or an upsizing.
And the upsizing, okay, so you said you also looked at vacant properties, presumably that if they were developed, no longer vacant, that they would need to use that system? Is that correct?
The modeling did take into account the existing capacity of that pipe and any other development that was anticipated that could contribute to that pipe.
Any anticipated, meaning that's in the pipeline, right? Figuratively
No.
speaking, anything that's in the pipeline now that, or you were looking at what might happen over the next 20 years?
I mean, typically, they would look at any parcels that may not be contributing flow now, but we would anticipate that they
that's-
would
that's
contribute
what I
flow.
Yeah,
And so
and-
that led to you saying that one section had to be upgraded to 12-inch pipe?
correct.
And that's where,
That was at the end of the road, sewer manhole 14 to the pump station. So that's right leading up to the pump station from Powder Mill Road. And actually, on that report too, if you look on page 2 of the report, page 4 of the report, it lists the specific properties and which properties were considered and the flows from those properties when creating the sewer model. There are some very good plans and views of what that model looks like with current state and then also with the proposed improvements.
okay.
Is it possible to put kind of a percentage capacity on that sewer line, now with, and then adding powder mill, and then how much is kind of left for future development? Or is that?
If I understand you correctly, so 8-inch has a certain capacity that you're saying if you now add powder mill place, it still has extra capacity beyond that. So what would be left after?
Does that mean that line is then running at 80% or 50% is kind of what I'm looking for?
So I'm looking at the results of the report, and the capacity of the pipe is anywhere from 0.36 to almost 0.5 million gallons per day. That's the capacity of the pipe.
And which page are you looking at, please?
That's, it's a hydraulic, it's the third hydraulic grade line, proposed conditions.
Okay.
And so the flow, there's a column there that shows the flow capacity. So it looks like it's all in the 25 to 40% range
Is what we're currently using.
is what we, no, that's what we expect with the new flows in the pipe.
Okay.
So we're, it's running at much less than half capacity of the pipe. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Can I ask one clarification question on Part C of the handout that we got today, where it has the sewer impacts further detailed, and then it has the three costs. The amount of reline, if I got this right, I never really quite had a chance to ask this, but it's 1,900 some odd of reline, and then 84 plus 61 feet, and then what does that refer to? I just don't understand what that means.
That's
Is
probably.
that excavation?
Excavation, replacement of pipe as opposed to lining.
That's correct. That's
So
correct.
60 feet replacement,
So the 84 feet is replacement of existing 8-inch pipe, and then the 61 feet is upsizing 8-inch pipe to 12-inch.
okay, got it,
So,
thank you.
yeah, and those 4 lines were actually taken out of the MOA. But, yeah. that's
So-
what and then they had put 450,000 in that, in the cost estimates from Stantec were at 399,000. 523 were on the last page of the Stantec model.
And that's based on just, current per foot kind of costs, not on a quote or anything, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So, go ahead.
One quick, sorry. Can you say, is there any difference in the number of years we should expect service from a new pipe versus a relined pipe?
We like to, whenever we're planning maybe a new system, it's anywhere from 50 to 80 years we'd like to get out of the pipe. They'll get, with the lined pipe, they'll get 40, 50 years out of that for sure.
So a new pipe would range from 50 to 80 and a relined 40 to 50, or
Yeah,
roughly the
yeah.
same? Or
I mean, I'm not, actually, I should probably, talk to my engineers about that to know the real difference. But, and I could get back to you on that.
Okay, or maybe at Mondays, if you want to answer that. That would be great.
One of our engineers is going to be at the meeting on Monday night.
So on the revenue side, so if this project were brought into the system, what kind of revenues would we be getting from them on a beginning basis and a recurring basis?
So we're looking at, so the current connection fees are $3,500 per dwelling unit. That's where we're at. That's what the current connection fees were increased in 2016 from $3,000 to $3,500 per dwelling unit. And
Is this for Maynard, or is this for outside of the town? Is there a difference in
there's no
price?
difference between outside of the town and in town for connection fees.
But 3,500 is what you would charge a house to connect.
Correct. Or apartment building, it would be per dwelling unit. It's what we charge 129 Parker Street for their apartments. It was $3,500 per 187 apartment units that they had. So it'd be $3,500 times I think it's 250 apartment units, plus we would charge another connection fee for a clubhouse and the pool facility, and another connection for any other standalone buildings that required a connection. Really, they would have one connection to the building, or to our system in the street, but we charge per dwelling unit. That was a change we made. We did an assessment of our connection fees 2 years ago, working with Stantec, and we looked throughout the region and made that adjustment. Before, it would have been $3,500, or $3,000 just for the one property.
So, so that's to begin. So then, over time, then they're paying.
So they would pay based on their usage. So the way that it would work is they would get, ideally, we would get one bill from that property. It wouldn't be it wouldn't be sub-metered or anything like that. That's up to the property manager, but we would collect one bill from that property for all the usage. So what I would anticipate seeing is we install our own meters on the incoming water service, so we can track that and do a quarterly meter reading, just like we do with every other property in the town of Maynard, and then charge them based on their usage. And based on their anticipated usage on that property, the sewer bill would be somewhere around $375,000 a year.
So then, in addition to that, there are some things specified in the MOA in terms of improvements that they would make. But, so those are the three components of revenue that we would have: the hookup fees, the annual usage, and then whatever's in the MOA in terms of improvements that they're gonna make?
Correct.
My understanding is we have different in-town versus out-of-town water rates.
Correct.
Only on the usage.
Only on water or on sewer?
On both.
Okay. Are you anticipating you would bill Maynard differently than the Acton piece of that property? Or have you?
I would say that'd probably be a discussion for, and maybe administration, and the property owner to see what the actual address of that property is gonna be. Is it gonna be a Maynard property? Is it an out-of-town property? And how do we wanna break up that bill? Technically, it'd be one account, it's one property. They're not individual townhomes or condos, so I don't know how the addresses would work. I would see, that would probably we'd probably have some discussion about how we'd break that out. That'd probably be something to be a negotiated piece in the
So
MOA.
your $375 estimate of the yearly bill, is that in-town rates?
That's out of town rates. If I charged everything out of town, that was just a quick number. So the rates changed too. So we did our last rate assessment, in December of last year of 2017, and we looked at, the next 3 years and the budget for 3 years. 3 years out, and that includes salaries, expenditures, and capital needs, known capital needs in the system. And it looked at current usage, and current demand, water and sewer throughout the town based on historical usage. And it did not look at future properties. It would not take into account 120 Parker Street. We did not take, Powder Mill Place development into account when setting those rates. We anticipate maintaining the same rates for 3 fiscal years. 18, 19, and 20, and next fall we'll probably do another rate assessment to reassess where we're at, how much revenue we're taking in, what the budgets look like for water and sewer enterprise accounts.
Do you know roughly what the premium is or the extra charge for out-of-town?
We can get
I don't know what the percentage. I can look it up and send it to you.
And then do you know, is there a state or some limit on, can we just decide to double the out-of-town rate, so they sign up for this project, we agree to do it, and next year we decide, oh, let's double your sewer rates?
The water and sewer commissioners have the authority to change rates, so it'd be up to them. But theoretically, yeah, they can increase it to whatever amount that they would
Are there any
want.
state regulations limiting the premium we can charge or anything like that?
No, there's no, it's, maybe you're referring to maybe like the electric rates are controlled by a utility board or something like that, state utility board. That's not how it works in the water and wastewater business. It's local decisions.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
And-
I'm sorry, go ahead, Aaron.
There are other out-of-town accounts. There are 35 currently other out-of-town accounts that take water and sewer from the town of Maynard.
So I wanted to wrap up our discussion here. I think it's pretty safe to say we're gonna continue this discussion just based on the level of interest. Laura, do you have any other things that you wanna ask that haven't been asked?
No.
This time? Jill?
No, I think you guys covered everything.
Okay. Tom, do you have anything?
Just sort of a side issue. I think we were talking about that pumping station behind the Middlesex Bank. Regardless of what happens at Powder Mill Road, with the 129 Parker Street development, does that have to come down through this pumping station to go across the river as well?
Yeah.
It does.
Well, so that regardless of what happens at Powder Mill Road, you're going to be talking about increasing the capacity of that pumping station and the additional pipeline, or not,
No, the pipeline capacity is fine.
with that one development, with the 129 coming on?
That's
stream?
correct.
Okay.
And for the foreseeable future, the capacity is fine. But the project being considered or recommended is to add a second discharge pipe from that pump station across the river to the wastewater plant.
So you do that in regardless?
That's recommended, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Tom? Anything else?
That's fine.
PJ, do you have anything? You have something?
Nope.
Bob?
No.
So I'd like to take maybe 5 minutes. If people, anyone from the audience wants to come up, please come up to the podium and introduce yourself and ask the Finance Committee your question. Dick, you want to come up?
Dick Downey, Howard Road. I'm curious what the headroom would be if there's a build-out on the old Stratus building and a build-out in the mill, which is now roughly half full, and I think the old Stratus building is empty. If they were to both go in there, what would that do to the headroom that you have in the capacity of the thing? And then secondly, you talked about average capacity for the day. But what does that mean to peak capacity? Because I'm sure from midnight to 6 in the morning, there's not much going on. So how is peak capacity fit into the whole algorithm of figuring this out? Because would you potentially have backups or something? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Do you have an immediate answer, or is that something you'd prefer to get back to us on?
I,
We can get back to him.
yeah, we can get back to you on that. I think it all depends too on what is built out and what do we put in those facilities? Are we putting residential, commercial, what type of commercial? There's a lot of different factors that affect how much flow is coming on, so.
Yeah, so, I mean, that was actually in the original questions that we sent, not as specific, but sort of the idea that there are projects out there. There's Stratus, there's Old Mill Road, there's a, large industrial property up that way. I hadn't even thought about the mill, the fact that the mill is, not at its capacity. If that were to happen, boy, wouldn't that be wonderful? There's, I think again, in our role, making, a recommendation on behalf of town meeting voters, part of the concerns I think I have is what are the risks down the road? So thanks. Thank you, Dick. Other questions? Ron?
I'm Ron Calabria from Deer Path. Sort of related to Dick's question. You mentioned that there's about a 50% flow on the Powder Mill Road pipe on average, so that's a factor, but what's ideal? Obviously, I don't think you'd want an average of 100%. So what would you shoot for?
That's interesting.
Maximum capacity on average.
So just to make sure I'm understanding your question.
And I'm
you're
asking you,
saying-
but they're going to answer it, so.
No. So what you're asking is, when you're looking at pipe capacity, you wouldn't want to be at 100%. So what would be the ideal percentage?
So it's 50% of something.
Okay. Is there a standard sort of number with that?
I think we could have our folks answer that on Monday night. Our wastewater engineer is going to be there, and I'll make sure that he understands that's an issue. I think the other part of that is it's the peak flow that's really critical, not the average flow in the pipe. So I'll have him be
Could you
prepared to
explain
talk
that?
about that. Well, like on a rain event, sometimes water does get, the rain does get into the system in different ways as well. And so that's where the sewer system sees its highest flow. So we want to be sure that it has the capacity to handle that.
How does rain get into the sewer system? I'm just curious.
Could be through sump pumps. People could have sump pumps in their basements. Could be, sometimes people have roof leaders that are connected, should be connected to the storm drain, but sometimes an
Okay.
older system is connected to the sewer.
Okay, all right.
But then leaks in pipes too, right?
And there's some leaks in pipes as well,
Okay,
maybe leaks in manholes.
So I had a second question, if I could.
sure.
In the report from the CCTV, I thought I read that it said there were spiral fractures in some portions of the pipe versus cracks, and there were also depressions or sinking in sections of the pipe. So I don't know if those are the sections you plan to replace, but my understanding from talking to other engineers is that it might not be the best idea. Well, the depressions will accumulate material and reduce the size of the pipe over time. So if there are those significant depressions, it's not an 8-inch pipe. So can you talk to me about that?
Yep, and again, the gentleman who's gonna be at the meeting on Monday actually was the one who reviewed the CCTV tapes. Typically, if we find a depression, that's not a pipe that's typically lined, because there may be underlying reasons for the depression. Could be the bedding material under the pipe. So if that is an issue, then typically that is a pipe that is replaced, not relined.
Okay, because what I read was there were pretty significant depressions, but thank you.
Thanks. So the person who's going to be there at Monday, who's that?
It's Victor Olson.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
He's the one who wrote the other part of the report, yeah.
He did, yes.
Other questions from the audience? Yep, come up.
Donna Dodson from Summer Street. So you said there were 3 sort of capital improvements you were recommending: the pipes, the relining, the replacing, the upsizing, adding a second main, force main. Is that all come up to the $399,000, or is that even like, is the $399,000 just the pipes, the upgrades to the collection system? And if so, what's the cost on the second force main? I was not following that.
So the 399,000 is just the collection system.
Okay.
From Powder Mill Place development to the lift station. And then there's another report that's on the website, and that is the Powder Mill Pump Station force main. And that has a description of work and a cost table. And that shows $345,000 for the installation of the second force main, and then an additional $353,000 to reline and rehabilitate the current force main.
So that's altogether 700,000? Okay, and the developer has just offered 450 so far.
Actually,
To Tom's question, if, 80% of the town runs through that lift station, and this, project is 4% of the, so, I don't know, something like 8% of the lift station or something, you'd be recommending the force main work, irrespective of the powder mill development.
That is correct.
Okay.
I believe we got those cost estimates, I believe, after the town received that MOA.
Okay.
I don't think the developer saw that force main number.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
I think they ran off like a verbal estimate of what it might cost.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
Anything else, Donna?
No, that was
Okay.
it.
Any other questions?
I have one.
Yep.
Sorry. As a follow-up then, so I think it's a great question, is there the ability to look at the MOA? I mean, I'm not sure the timing when we're looking to sign that, but could we, I realize it's a percentage, and probably the developer would think their fair portion of that is a small percentage, but is there any way to renegotiate that number
I think
closer to the 700,000?
I think that question would be best directed to Greg. To Greg Johnson. I'm not really involved with the negotiations at this time.
Yep.
I do have, I've listed that as well as the recommendation on the continued assessment of the wastewater treatment facility as recommended by Veolia, and I think that's something that there's going to be a cost associated with that.
Sure.
And that would be something that I would see a developer paying for.
Okay.
And I think that's similar to what we had for like the 129 Parker Street project. We had the developer pay for a portion of the assessments.
Any idea the
and-
ballpark on the assessment that you were talking about there?
I would assume between $20,000 to $30,000. That's pretty consistent with what the cost of the other assessments that were done for 120 Parker Street and so far on the Powder Mill Place.
Thanks.
Just one.
Yep.
I'm gathering from your reports that you can make a pretty good estimate of what the volume will be for a projected development. It's the quality that I'm hearing is a bit of a wild card.
Not from this type of development. It's all residential flow. So it's pretty consistent. I would expect that it would fall within the typical flow that we would see from residential usage.
Thank you.
There's no industrial usage, no restaurants or things like that.
Okay. Any last question? Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you very much.
Gary.
Sure.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
I think we're going to talk about this a little later on, and we may have some other questions for you, obviously,
Absolutely.
so thanks.
That's fine.
Thank you for having us.
All right.
Appreciate it. Have a great night.
All right. That's very interesting.
Yes. Yeah, thank you very much.
Just all the stuff you don't know. All right. So I'm going to rip through a couple of small things here before we get on to the next, I guess, big thing. So I draw your attention to email that was sent that Ron Calabria and Chief Stowers had sent out about the status of the fire station project. I'm sure Laura's already gotten her assessment and analysis of the preliminary financials all done, ready to recommend to the rest of the committee. So, anyway, I just wanted to draw your attention to that because that's something we're going to have to turn our attention to. Andrew has asked for time to come talk about the capital planning policies and so forth. And so that would be part of that at the next meeting. So next Monday, I'm going to be out of town, so I will unfortunately miss the other information session. Peter has already communicated to me that he's planning on attending. Is anybody else planning on going? This is the meeting hosted by the Board of Selectmen, the information, the long-awaited information session.
Don't know yet.
I'm sorry?
Don't know.
Okay.
I haven't got my calendar with me, but if,
All right.
I'll be there if.
Well, okay, so let me be less gentle. So I asked everybody to let me know if you can attend next Monday, so if you would, let me know if you can attend next Monday. Part of this is if we have a whole bunch of people and there's going to be, if we're attending as private citizens, then that's probably not a big issue. Although I guess technically at some
Yeah,
point.
in theory, if we get to a quorum, we should be posting it.
If we're deliberating, yeah. So anyway, I'll send out
If we're
a,
asking questions and everything,
that's right,
counts as.
as
may count
deliberations.
deliberating.
Yeah. So, well, that's it. If it doesn't post it, then you guys can't ask any questions.
No, only I can go then. I'll just kick out. Have to keep under 4 people.
There you go. All right, so Greg and Mike, why don't we talk about our other discussion here? So, I will draw the committee members' attention to the packet that sits behind the agenda. And there are several pieces of documentation there. I did... let's see here. Bring a few extra copies. Mike, I think you're gonna have to come up, Mike, you're gonna have to come up here and sit on the hot seat. All right? But,
Thank you.
so as a reminder, our discussions about the long-range planning framework that we're looking at and wanting to develop. Okay, so just to clarify, this is a discussion we've now had for several meetings. The idea of putting a framework that would build on the work that Bob had already done. and others previously to put together that framework. I know Mike had been feeding some data into that. And the idea here is to sort of look at that framework, see if it is sufficient. I think we already identified some things that we'd like to see in that framework, maybe in addition, and then have a discussion. So Greg is here, Mike is here, to see how they can support this long-range framework that we would be using, but also have a discussion that, you know, ultimately we're thinking about how does this feed into the annual budget planning process. So it doesn't make sense to sit there and have two separate processes that don't really relate. So just to go over what I have here. So there's 3 pages of text, I guess 2 pages, 2 pages of text that Bob had developed, note on the model and scenario, discussion starter, and the planning model approach. And then there's a page there with the average expense, budget growth, and so forth. And so this is the past several years of budgets, including the current year budget, that is then divided up into the 8 budget categories that we've been using. And so this gives us some sense of what past history. And so I think one of the points that Bob has made several times is that our percentage share among the 8 budget categories, this would be general government, public safety, public works, education, Maynard Public Schools, education, Assabet Valley, or Assabet, the tech, VOTEC school, culture, recreation, debt service, employee benefits, that these don't change significantly on a percentage basis. And then the next page is a scenario overview for scenario 1, same growth from new development over the next 6 years. And he has different scenarios, 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D. And you actually had a lot more. I didn't copy off all the scenarios, but that was part of the larger PowerPoint slide deck that I had sent out to everyone, and also Greg and Mike have it as well. Then on the next page you see the scenario 1C, and this is now projecting forward, so FY19, 20, 21, and so forth. And then obviously, because education, Maynard Public Schools is a significant portion of that, the next 2 pages then take a look at one breakdown of that amount into some subcategories that include administration, salaries, food services, maintenance, et cetera, et cetera. And the idea we could talk to the Maynard Public Schools about that. So there's 2 pages of that.
So it doesn't show the 1D, you didn't capture that, but if I may.
Yeah.
The idea here is a baseline looking at what we've done in the past 5 years. Project forward with some round numbers. They're not meant to be accurate, and they're not meant to suggest a plan. Mm-hmm. They are a couple of scenarios, and we could do hundreds. But there are a few scenarios that, at least get a feel for if we pulled money back from, all 8 categories and then reapplied it in some different way than we've been doing typically in the past, what might they look like? Would we have enough revenue then to hit some of our major priorities as a community? And those, as we discussed last year, and those of you were here last year in the December timeframe, November and December timeframe, these are the same ones. They haven't changed, though we do propose that we will make changes. So the idea being, a lot of people think we should up our contributions and allocations to schools because we've been below their level service budgets. but we also have underfunded, at least it's my assertion that we have underfunded some of our capital projects as well. So with limited resources, limited revenue growth, and we cap this at about 250 per year, sometimes 250,000. Sometimes it's 300,000, but it's a round number. It could be incrementally larger with 129 coming online. So this does a very simple job, and I wish it was in here 1D, that you could either cap the budget and do a portion to capital projects and a portion to schools, and you could do it 50-50, you could do it 80-20. We could do a number of different things. We could say we think that they need more than the 4% average they've been getting. Let's make it 6%. What would that do to the other departments? So, summary, they're planning scenarios that we think we could develop based on projections of what revenue we can expect and when incremental revenue might hit. They're not meant to be the plan, but they certainly could inform us of where we hit constraints, where we might go over our levy ceiling, where we might go over our debt service targets, and potentially even jeopardize, if we take out a stabilization, we could jeopardize borrowing percentage and interest rates, that kind of thing. So it's meant to give a chance for people to see major impacts, not to kind of debate tiny little amounts, 20,000 here, 40,000 there. It's for the big ticket items. The fire station comes to mind, the fact that the schools are saying that we've, for years been underfunding their level service budget, and that's impacted service. But it also gives us a chance, and this is where I think we need to develop a little bit more on the revenue side. What are the likely sources of revenue? How are they going up, down? What are our fixed costs? How are they going up? Eating away at, available monies for funding all the expense budget items we are looking for. So that's something I think we wanted to talk about, Ken, if I'm right, of taking a lot of the spreadsheets that you've done, Mike, that I've used in some of these projections to go forward and say, how do we do scenarios for how they might change just as we might change our budget expenses? And we want to talk about, does this model make sense to go forward with? Fair enough?
Yeah.
So I think that's a really critical part of this. So as we've been discussing it, the idea here we'd be essentially doing some gaming to sit there and look at, as Bob laid out, what the various options would be. And this would be on large sums of money. We're not sitting here talking about making minor adjustments, but it's more along the sort of philosophical lines of what values do we have and how do we translate those into budget actions. Now, what attracts me about this is, I fundamentally think that until we start to address revenue issues, that, we can sit here and talk about expenses all day. We're just going to keep talking about it, and they're going to continue to go in a direction that's not necessarily good. And that's one of the reasons why my focus has been so much on, we've got to think about, radically increasing the amount of revenues. You go down to Sudbury and you see these big, huge developments, and you're thinking, well, of course, Sudbury's a different scale town than ours is, but that's, that's sort of what it is. And when we look at where the town's getting ready to do its master plan, and it's gonna go out to the members of the Maynard community and say, here's our plan. If I have anything to do with it, it's gonna sit there and say, we've got to significantly increase commercial development in order to start bringing in revenues and look to see, is that something that the town as a whole is willing to do, or are they okay with revenues continuing to go the direction that's going? So that's what attracts me so much, this idea of sort of laying out the scenarios and saying, if we change this lever, this is how that happens. So will you?
Yes, so I think that's all true. I think it would be worthwhile, I was thinking, maybe at this meeting or a different meeting, but to even step back one before we get there and talk about some of the assumptions we did in doing the projections. So we had talked about projections last year and wanting to do multi-year budgeting, had some vision of trying to get departments to forecast expenses. That's a lot of work for departments, and I think everybody gets really conservative and budgets high. And I'm not sure it's all that worthwhile an exercise. So the kind of two things I would focus on that I would love to have a little bit of either discussion about, and either you guys think it's a good idea or don't, or maybe we need to change our model somewhat, is, so one, the overall thing we're using is 4% growth year over year. And that's based, so if you look at,
You talking revenue now?
sorry?
Are you talking
Revenue.
expense growth? or revenue?
Expenses, but it's revenue too, because we have to be a balanced budget. So if you look at the 4th page of this, the top section looks at FY14 through FY18, the average growth of the budget, the average is 3.9%. We used 4% as a rounded, convenient, easy figure. So, that's one key assumption in here, and you could argue we should be trying to refine that or change that in some way. The kind of second key, not assumption, but the way we did it, was to look at each of these 8 line items, their percentage share of the budget. And again, year over year, we got a 6-year average, and then, used that going forward. So, again, you could say, I think it's fairly accurate, but you could argue, no, we should be more precise, that, we know debt service is gonna go down, at least until something happens. Maybe we wanna argue pensions and benefits should be higher, and they're gonna continue to go up over time. Is there some refining we should do to that? 'Cause, my ideal thing would be, so we talk about your inputs into this. For that to happen, you guys have to think the model is worthwhile and actually has valid things to say. So I kind of want to highlight those 2 key things that we're using to make these projections and get some feedback on that. Or, maybe we're nuts. Maybe you would say, no, you can't use 4%. You really have to, map out every property value in town and do some really detailed analysis. I don't think so, but is that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we need a better assessment on, what's realistic over, even if it's a 4-year horizon from now, not 5, 6, so if people get nervous about that, something that's more than 1 year. Because I think you've talked about it before, the projections aren't that hard to do because a lot of these items don't change that much.
I could do it, we did one today. Revenue, there's only 2 things that basically are gonna change. Everything else, I can predict out 6 years if I had to. The only thing is new growth that you don't know, and local aid. And those are the 2 unknowns in the whole thing. So, you can make some estimates, which we did tentatively for next year. But other than that, things don't really change that much from year to year. In terms of maybe local receipts may go up or down. The
Chapter
danger.
70 maybe, a couple
Huh?
others. Chapter 70 can fluctuate kind of.
Well, that's the local
Yeah,
aid.
that's what I mean by
Yeah, it's in
local
local
aid.
aid, yeah.
But, I can give you a model that'll.
Charter school tuition
Right.
now.
But that's,
I can give you an
that's not
estimate.
revenue, that's
Yeah.
expense. So
Sure.
you're saying if we had a really good idea of what pot of money we had to spend,
Then,
within plus or minus 10% over the next 5 years,
Right,
and we really say this is it,
right.
absent a huge new development, how do we apportion that? And then the model might make sense in terms of choosing a number of different scenarios, what ifs.
That's something we can do. When I originally looked at it, I only did based upon an estimate of what I thought local aid would increase based historically
Yep.
on net, and I did a very conservative number of what new growth is. So, but if you have a big increase in new growth, let's say for 20, and she comes in and says, well, it's gonna be $1 million, that changes everything.
Yeah.
That changes the model going forward, because now you're talking 2.5%. But that's something, I think if you have a base model, then we can go from there, and you can make estimates and say, well, if we do this once, this is what we have available, and this is what it would be going forward, because then, that, as I said, there's very little that's gonna change. The only problem with certain expenses, or like when you do benefits, is, and I only bring this up only like, say, health insurance, for instance. if you go over a 5-year period and you look at what we've done over that 5-year period, we've made changes to it. So to come up with a percentage, that's nice, but you'd almost have to look at that percentage really going forward and not what you did in the past. Because if you take over the 5 years, you may say it's 8%, but it could, 4% when it's really not, because we've made 3 significant changes in the last 3 years.
So can I, if I summarize it this way,
I'm just-
the benefit of this model, if
Oh, yeah.
I may, is that all of them don't have that much variability.
Right.
Some do. So employee benefits and that kind of thing those are good ones to pick because they vary quite a bit.
Exactly.
So you could change to a worst case and a best case scenario, and
Exactly.
you could extrapolate in between if you wanted to, but you wouldn't, it makes it sustainable. If it
Right.
hadn't been said before, what we're
Right.
trying to do is make it relatively easy to update this next year for another 5-year outlook, not make it be somebody's treatise that they spend months on. So it has to be relatively simple, going after the big budget drivers, not every nickel and dime.
Oh, yeah. I
So
mean,
I
the
think-
benefits, there's really, you're talking, we know what pension is going to be, that's a 6% given.
Yeah.
Medicare and stuff like that, that's basically, having to do with salary increases, or maybe it's whatever. So those are the types of things from your model. I mean, you could put those numbers in there and play with that. And then you'd have to determine what you think health insurance would be.
And
Well,
that
but
might,
even
that
if-
might be the only worst and best case scenario.
Right,
You could say, if this,
exactly.
then.
So I mean, the
here's what
model
happens.
itself you have would be, if you did something like that, it would make sense to do that.
So you sit there, you put in a set of assumptions.
Right.
In terms of a thing, we're assuming local aid will go up by this percentage.
Right.
And if it ends up being different, and then, you're having to make adjustments. I mean, part of this is a planning model
Oh,
for
yeah.
us over a longer period of time that feeds into the annual budgeting process. That, in an ideal world, that's what it would do. It would also serve as an education tool, communication tool for all of us, so that if somebody comes in, as it seems like every spring that does, well, how come we can't give more to schools, or how come we can't do this, or what's gonna be the impact of a new fire station, or what have you, we can sit there and run scenarios on that exact thing. If we buy a fire station now, and we take debt in order to do it, this is what it's gonna cost. If we wait 5 years, and, we save, we set aside X amount of money into, some sort of fund, and therefore we're not having to take as much debt, this is what we do. But that, to me, is what it comes down to, is just.
I mean, I like the model. I mean, and what the assumptions and stuff. I mean, those are the things you're gonna have to play with, but I know from a revenue standpoint, I could sit down and put something together and send it to you and saying, this is what I know as a fact. And I said, the only thing that's gonna change in that model is gonna be new growth. And once you change it once, it could change year to year. And the only other thing that's gonna change would be local aid.
Well, and local aid actually is taking on, I mean, I hate to keep sounding like a broken record, but local aid is taking on a significant,
I know.
with the charter school tuition out.
Absolutely.
And that thing is, that curve is heading like this.
Oh, yeah.
And, when people say, well, how come we're not spending more money educating our children? Well, the reality is, you take a look at Maynard, you take a look at Assabet, you take a look at charter school, take a look at school choice, and we're spending a significant amount of money, more than just the Maynard Public Schools amount, and I think that's something that I would like
So-
to see
Yeah, because
reflected.
one of the analysis I gave you, I did 3 analysis of the local aid. I said, let me look at charter school over the years, and then I looked at which, chapter 70, what we've gotten say the last 15, 20 years, and what we did as, just the other piece of it. And as you can see, when the analysis I did, it's kind of saying it's significant on the charter school. We're basically,
But I think,
it's losing
so,
money.
one of the things Ken mentioned was kind of the public education piece.
Right.
So, I mean, one of the challenges we're trying to face is, historically, as we look at revenue for the town, the local aid is just dropped in, or the state aid is dropped in as a net number.
Right.
And I think we want to kind of expand that a little bit to show whether it's really this, gross aid from the state, less charges from the state, and one of those charges has gone up dramatically over the last couple of years to, multiple
I mean,
hundreds
when
of
we do the
thousands.
budget, the model, that's a separate line, what the assessments are. But,
I'm sorry, your model of local aid?
yeah,
what?
and plus what I give you.
Yeah, but I think
Right,
what we're
but we're trying-
saying is we want to break that out to show the components so that people see that one of the components of local
Oh,
aid.
didn't I send that to you? I have.
Yeah,
this is
but
just
it's trying to
back
balance, so,
1980.
it's trying to balance, so, when you get to the expense side, and we can
Right.
talk about this
Right.
separately, but, we've reduced it to these 8 line items.
Right.
Maybe that's right, maybe that's not, maybe education needs to get broken out a little bit more because it's so big. But when we're on the revenue side, in most town reports, your spreadsheet, I'm sure, is very detailed. It doesn't lend itself to a, kind of simple explanation we can put forward as, a model for the budget. And we just can't have that much detail in it because we won't get anybody to read it. Read it short.
There's 3 things I gave you recently. One was the increase in chapter 70 over the years. And then there was one that gave an analysis of the other piece of it.
Yeah.
And then there's one I just did for charter school. I even did one for Assabet.
Yeah.
In Assabet, really, if you look at it, other than the debt piece, doesn't change. The
Right.
basic
Right.
thing. But I mean, the key thing that Ken bringing up, which is true, what's killing us is charter school. Because if you look at last year versus this year, that's a big increase.
Well,
Yeah.
if you look at 4 or 5 years ago,
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
a huge.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, if
well,
you-
so there's 2 aspects to this. One is making sure that the members of the Maynard community, when they sit there and say, what are we investing in our children, that they're seeing the fuller
Oh, absolutely.
picture of what they're doing. And if you look at the bottom line on Maynard Public Schools, the town of Maynard is actually spending a lot more. I mean, we've made the point that the, significant amount of the benefits goes towards, benefits cost goes towards teacher, debt service, certain percentage of that goes towards education as well.
And incremental new revenue, very largely goes to education. To
Last
about
year,
80%.
last year.
And it has been close to that in the last couple of years.
But I
So,
think we ought to give ourselves credit
Oh,
for a town of how much we're actually investing in our kids, and that to me is, it's just easy to look at Maynard Public Schools and look at how, at the curve there and say, well, Jesus, this doesn't seem to be going up very much. But the bottom line is that if you look at the components together, it's a significant investment that we as a town are making in our kids.
and let me just add this point, I've made it before, and I think of the major budget drivers, there's a lot of ways to look at these 8 categories, but for these scenarios, all we've done is infrastructure investments we put in as debt service, which it won't always be. But we don't really have a category for liquid capital, to put in as a budget item. We don't have a capital budget item in each budget. So probably there needs to be some distinction between what are we going to go out and bond and have for debt service and what are we going to pay outright. But my point is going to be, we look for windfalls to, we don't have a policy. I know Andrew and others are trying to make one, and I'm going to give him feedback on this, that there needs to be a funding mechanism that we believe can help us get to that $3 million per year number that isn't hope, but it's real. And that will make it even harder to fund education.
Right.
So where we've been trying to get to, may I just finish this?
Okay.
Where we've been trying to get to in the last year and a half is to make it far clearer to the average voter who believes that there's probably a lot of waste in town government, that these are the constraints, and we don't have enough revenue to fund them all. And if you factor in the fact, if you believe that we have not invested enough in infrastructure, and we have to, starting with a fire station and others, we've got a real significant challenge ahead of us and tough choices to make. So if these scenarios help people understand that and then help weigh in on the tough choices, then they're a success. If they don't and they collect dust, it's a total waste of time. And we're really looking for buy-in that, is this model good enough? Is it sustainable to be able to easily reproduce next year and the year after, to be able to look forward a few years and then finalize our current fiscal year budget? There's only so many hours we can look at this and say this looks okay before we decide, is it going to translate to easily make decisions in the general community? So that's the feedback we're looking for.
As far as the capital thing, we do have a line, but that line has been 85,000 for the last 3 years.
Yeah, it doesn't get to
No, it hasn't
3 million very
changed.
fast, that
No,
way, right?
no.
Yeah.
I mean, if you just took, other than with debt exclusion, which basically
Yeah.
one goes down, the other one goes down also, so it's a net. If you look at just interest alone,
Yeah.
you're not talking a lot. You're only
Right.
talking maybe 30,000, 40, if that, a year, so.
Right. So when you look at
Well,
these,
that-
those of you who have seen these scenarios, just remember that the infrastructure is just a plug into debt service.
Right.
And by the way, it doesn't reach 3 million in the next 5 years, right?
No.
It goes up a maximum of 1.5 million with trying to take as much money, we used a 3.5%
Yeah.
cap. I mean, sorry, a 3% cap versus a 3.5%. And it doesn't get us where we need to go. So it doesn't please those who want to do infrastructure investment, and it doesn't please the schools to get to level service. But those are fiscal realities, and that's all the revenue we got so far.
Oh, yeah, I don't disagree.
And it's,
Well, and this is, again, the reason why I say, if people look at those, and we're sitting here saying, here's the model going forward, and they said, well, that doesn't give as much as we want, okay, what lever do you want to, what lever do you want to adjust?
Right.
Because, there's an expense lever, but there's also a revenue lever. And I, sat in, meeting downstairs where they're talking about a couple projects here in town, and people like, we don't want projects like this. Well, I understand that, but, that's, the reality is, these are projects, and this is the way that you generate additional tax revenue that you can then use, so.
I mean, we've been lucky too right now is that we've had sufficient free cash to do a lot of things, to put into the capital stabilization. But that's only a recent phenomenon.
someone
Basically,
once said
since
to me, hope is not
2013.
strategy, and that's hope that continues, right?
Yeah,
It
because
probably
when
won't.
you look at what I gave you, if you look at 2013 versus now, I say, if I include this year, you're talking out of, say, since 1980, out of 20 million, roughly 14 million of that comes within the last 6 years. So it doesn't say very much, that historically. And I think that's the part sometimes is misleading, is what we've done. And I think the other thing too is you brought out, because you bring up debt. And one of the things that came out when we borrowed for water and sewer, you could have all the categories you want. The main thing that holds us back from having a change in our bond rating is debt. And if you look at where we were in 2013 versus now, we've cut it by like close to 35%. We haven't borrowed, and that's, so I mean, and that's significant.
Oh,
But
yeah.
that's a decision that was made, and I'll be honest, that Cheryl and I made. And when we looked at free cash, what's that balance and what do we do? We could have very easily have ignored it and say, yeah, go out and borrow for carpets like we did in the past. But, we've made it work, as you said. Now I think just using your model, we can fine tune it, put in some numbers, and we go from there. It
Well,
may
so
take us
I
a
don't know
year.
that it's just fine tuning though. I mean, so we've talked about some various components. So one, so first component would be taking a look at past revenues and expenditures. Now, we know that you have a lot of information on that, but part of this is trying to tie these to those, to some useful grouping. Now, we've been using these 8 classifications on the expenditure side. It would make sense that the revenues may not lend itself well to that, but, the idea here is, it can't be one number, but it can't be 300 numbers,
Right.
for the, reasons that
It
Peter
can't
was
be,
saying.
yeah.
Part of this is the planning tool, the more complex it gets, the harder it is gonna be keeping track of all the levers. But it would be nice to have something, I think, along the lines of about 8-ish or 10-ish, groupings on the revenue side, similar to what we have on the expenditure side.
with the idea also that there are some specific things we're trying to call out. So you're talking about school spending. I mean, I think it's interesting to know how much of our debt service goes to schools.
We'll be doing that when I have to do their end-of-year reports. I'll be able to put all that
But
together for
we
you.
can't really do much about that now.
No.
We've already built the high school. I think there, could be more recognition that the 48,000 that's going out for charter schools, if we cut that, that's 300,000 more we could spend on schools.
Oh, yeah. Well, even the
that's
debt that
more
we paid
real
for,
money. That's
we just paid for
something we
Assabet
could
that
do.
1 year. That
So-
cost us 250,000, that 1 year alone.
So the idea is to try to come up with sort of this, so for about probably 4 years plus current year, so to sit there and have a modeling, a categorization on the revenue side. We already have one on the expenditure side, although,
It assumes things about the revenue, which are, they're as accurate as I think we can be until you come in and say, wait a minute, it's not gonna be 4% average, it's more like, 3%, 4.5%. Those kinds of things will matter, but in the fractions of percentage points, they'll matter, right? So I think that we just need feedback that our assumptions make sense on terms of revenue projections.
Or that they don't make sense.
But yeah, I mean, whatever makes them more real than the round number we've chosen. We didn't mean to say that it's always going to be about 4%. It could vary quite a bit.
but the idea though is the categorizations allow us then to sit there and say, if you want to dedicate more to schools, then here are the other 7 pots that you've got to take it out of.
But that's the expense side.
I understand that, but it works the same way on the revenue side. If you want to sit here and increase revenues, we know that many of these revenue pools don't change much
Right.
from year to year.
Yeah, so what are the ones that you can
And so what
affect?
are the ones that you can't?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And sometimes they can't be mixed either. So they
Meaning,
have dedicated uses, and they
That's
can't
right.
be
Correct.
rededicated to something else.
yeah. So local aid,
Yeah.
the chapter 70 funding or chapter.
so we're not looking for budget buckets to match. We're looking for some manageable number of revenue buckets and say, just like we did with culture and recreation isn't going to change very much. So let's not talk about that, right? Let's talk about the ones that might.
Well,
vary.
so
And
We
the
can
same is
do
true
is,
for revenue.
and Greg can, we did something where I did one that goes into really a lot of detail. Like
Yeah.
what makes up local receipts, and then I
Yep.
did one that summarizes what's on that page, which we can even cut, summarize
Distill,
even more,
yeah.
less. We could change it, and then you can look at it and see if that meets what your needs, or whether you want to,
Yeah,
Well, so I think you're right that the buckets don't have to match, but I think to some extent, if there is sort of a flow from the way that you're keeping, you're keeping detailed budget.
I also do a summary,
So,
which we
so
have to
if there's
summarize.
a way
it
of sort
more.
of bringing those up to a fewer number of
Yeah,
8 to
absolutely.
10 big buckets,
Oh, it's easy enough to
that
do.
makes it useful. That way, the taxpayer who's trying to make the translation between the detailed budget reports that they see in the town report or wherever, that they're seeing some correlation between that. Now, having said that, I'll again acknowledge the fact that they don't have to match up, but.
I mean,
well, they can't. I guess that's the point. I mean, if the revenue tax levy has one big number, that some portion of that, like we've talked about in the 8 categories, gets distributed, right? So you have to have different categories for revenue, income, and expense up.
Correct.
Right? But you just want a manageable number of them.
I want a manageable number of them, and I want a manageable number so that, I also want, so that when the taxpayer looks at the detailed reports that they see in town meeting, that there's some flow.
So
you know,
connect the
upflow.
dots to
Right,
it. Yeah, sure.
right. So that there's some flow between the detailed reports and the higher level planning framework that we're putting together.
For an example, looking, forget the detail. I have, right now I break it up on the summary sheet, like indirect costs and everything, that could be one line. Bond premiums, one line. Local receipts could be one line. And the only other things you have is 4 categories for taxation, and you have 4 categories for local aid. That's it. That make up those individual pieces.
Well, and so
And
then.
but that does what you want. Tells you-
Well, so I would just say that that's probably the right way, although as Peter said, there may be discrete things that we want to call out because they happen to be of concern, or maybe they're a lever that we can. So, for example, you know, if you're sitting here taking all of local aid and putting it in there, well, there's some local aid that is related to education and others that are not.
Yeah, well, when I say there's 4, that breaks it up into
Yeah.
4 categories you're talking about. So even though on this sheet, you know, breaks it up into like, you know, it's still 4 categories.
So the idea would be that we would be able to take a look in the past 4 years and say, here's a trend of past data.
Okay.
Then we could take a look at current year of what is emerging, and then take a look at, you've been using what, 5 years in the future in yours?
Yeah,
4,
4, current.
Is current plus 4?
Coming,
plus 4.
Yeah.
Current
proposed plus 4, yeah.
So current plus 4, and so therefore, someone who's sitting there looking at the past can sit there and say, here's the trend that we're seeing 4 years plus current plus 4 years in the future, and what's changing, what's not changing, and what are the levers there. Now, the one, so that takes care of most of that. Now, already, you know, Bob had put together the future scenario on the expenditure side. You probably are doing this similarly on the revenue side.
I
when
mean,
you're
I could do that
when
in
you're
a short
when-
period
when
of
you're
time.
doing that. And then the one thing that's sort of sticky for us is the school, because the school, for a variety of reasons. First off, the school's such a big number, it needs to be broken down. But it's also, you know, some of the money comes from the town, some of the money's coming from the Commonwealth, some of the money shows up in the cherry sheet and, you know, different forms and stuff like that.
That's not relevant, though.
Well, it's not relevant.
Because we don't hold the school to account for Chapter 70 funding. I mean, traditionally, we have not, so.
Well,
if
so
this-
I'm not saying we hold them accountable, but what I think we have to do for the taxpayer who's trying to make sense of it is help them to understand where the various buckets of money are coming from.
But is that really, it's all just state aid? I mean, the state increases
It is
Chapter
important, no,
70?
it's critical, because
Why?
if you take it, the pieces that make up local aid,
Yeah.
they do change. I mean, for instance, you have, right now, you have Chapter 70, that's a gross number.
But why do we care whether we get it as Chapter 70 or general state aid?
Because right now, Chapter 70 money, you have tuition, charter school tuition is at $875,000.
That's a
going
deduction
out.
from state aid.
Correct, but that's money that the town's not getting.
I totally agree, but the gross Chapter 70 versus gross general government state aid makes no difference to me.
Can I ask you a question, Ken? On Chapter 70 stuff that we have here, and on this model, I do not break it up between charter school revenue and the other. Is that something you want to see?
Well, so I think it's not only something that I want to see, I think it's something that we have used. If you remember, you know, okay, so, you know, so this goes back 5 years or so ago when the schools, and I was on school committee at the time, they were making a big deal about how school choice had been going into the red, and that they had
Yep,
turned that
yep,
around
yes.
and was now putting it into the blue, and how we're actually now taking more money in and
Right,
so
right.
forth. Okay, well, if that's fair, when they turn school choice around and it goes from, you know, from in the red to in the black, then why is it not fair to sit there and look at charter school money, especially when you're talking about $875,000?
No, I totally agree it is, but
Well, here's the question I have for you.
Wait, hold on a
wait.
second.
But-
Go ahead.
that's a state aid charge. I'm not talking about that, I'm talking about the gross income from the state before the deductions. And I'm arguing it makes not a difference whether it's Chapter 70 or general government. We spend way more than Chapter 70 on schools. If Chapter 70 gets cut by 500,000, we don't go to the schools and say, your budget's cut 500,000.
I'm not
We-
suggesting that we go
Right, so
to
I'm
them
saying,
and
in
say-
this summary of stuff, it makes no difference to the voter whether the aid is Chapter 70 or general government.
I think it makes a
Okay,
great
it
deal of difference when somebody is sitting here saying, how come we're spending X amount on schools, and it's not X amount, it's a whole bunch of other things on top of that. They need
But
to.
that's the charges to state aid, it's not the gross aid. That's what I'm talking about. Can I ask Ron what his, because he thinks, do you disagree?
No, sort of my view of this is when, one of the things that happens is the schools will say, well, of the budget, we only get this percent, and the town gets that percent, but that's an oversimplification. And in line with what Ken is saying, but maybe going a step further, there are other targeted revenues. Trash expense, trash receipts, highway expense, highway revenue from the state aid. So if you go a step lower and you look at what is the real net spending minus aid for specific things, the schools are getting a very much larger share of net spending than it looks like. Because of revenue,
Yeah.
there are revenues, as she said, there are revenues that are dedicated. And if you look at percentages, it changes if you look at some of our, some of our town mostly, but some schools, departments that generate dedicated revenue. So when you separate revenue and expense over here, it's not really a true picture of what happens to the tax rate.
Yeah.
What my tax bill is, like ambulance funds.
All right, I'm not
Or
following.
parking receipts.
Okay.
There are a lot of other things, I think, it's a little different than what Ken said, but it goes in that same line. Because what people want to know is my tax money's going for that net number, not the gross number, not the 41 or 2 million. It's going to the net, and some of those, and so if there's a department that generates revenue, let's say like trash, we're counting the gross trash expense against the town. Well, they also get receipts.
But that's part of local
That's
receipts.
that's local receipts, yeah.
Yeah, but
So what-
it's generated, but it's a net against that specific department. If
Okay.
we didn't have that department, we wouldn't have that revenue. Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
My point is if we didn't have as many kids going out to charter schools, again, as I've said many times.
I know,
I don't
I do
have an
not-
issue with that, with somebody going to charter school if that's their choice. But the fact that we don't, that the town doesn't see that they are spending money to send kids to
Right.
charter school.
Yep.
And that's money that
I-
otherwise would be coming in and going to the
As we've
public
said
school.
several, yeah, I get that. I totally get that. We've said it 1,000 times. I don't understand you, but that's not what I'm talking about.
Okay,
I'm talking about how many lines of local aid are you gonna have? I'm arguing there's no point to separating Chapter 70 from general government. It's a minor point. It's not all that significant.
Yeah.
If you wanna list it
Go ahead.
twice, that's
I have
fine.
a question.
It sounds like you're having a discussion about the design of these models and scenarios
Yes.
and how they may look. And I would say that you don't have to decide this evening.
Yeah.
You could have the various options made available, and then you could say, well, this looks more sense with one less line, or this looks better because it's tied together. I would say that you don't have to decide tonight. I agree that having both discussions available is important, because people do need to understand both that it is an overall picture as well as the expenses that are tied to that aid. But I would say you're going back and forth a lot,
Yeah.
just so we can figure out how the spreadsheet's gonna look.
Right.
And I would say that we can look at how those spreadsheets may look.
that's a good point.
Here's my
So
question.
by starting with a baseline that we can react to and say, which way do we want to go with it?
Or
Is that what you
looking
meant?
at different optional ways that it would look like of what, I think what Greg's saying is, we could sit here and look at different formats and say, well, geez, I'd like to pull this out, or no, this, to Peter's point, we don't need this level of detail in this, and maybe we hide that.
Then we could do a quick survey. We could grab a couple of people that never look at our budgets the majority of the town, and just say, what do you think? Does this make sense to you? Do we need more clarification?
Yeah.
And then we can kind of adjust it from there. And this is our first attempt at it.
Yeah.
Like, we'll kind of figure it out as it
Can I
goes.
ask you a
I'll
question,
volunteer
Ken?
my wife.
Right now, when we do education, and we do however we do the budget, forgetting about the assessment piece, we basically have it as one number. It's really made up of two numbers, which is charter school revenue that we get supposedly, and chapter 70. Would you want me to break that down?
So if you look on the cherry sheet, there's school choice in and out, there's charter schools in and out.
Right, the charter
Okay.
school that we have is revenue, is really, you have chapter 70 and then you have charter school. And then, for some ungodly reason, you get charged for school choices and assessment, but the revenue doesn't go as part of your.
Well, so we can look at the details of this.
What I mean is, we could send you the detail. If you want, I can expand that one line if you want.
So can
Going
I
forward.
throw this out? I mean, you have very detailed revenue information, right? Many, many lines. I think what we're saying is we want something simpler.
Yeah,
that we
which is
can
what I
use
have.
on an ongoing
And how-
basis.
How detailed do you want that on the detail and then summary?
Right. So let's,
Well, to
It's charter
Greg's
school.
point, why don't we take a look at some different, I mean, I think ultimately what we're saying is, we're having a discussion about how we will use this.
Okay.
Okay, and how we think that it will be a tool towards the annual budget planning process, but also for the town meeting voter to help understand some of the things that we're talking about, so they're not having to look through pages and pages.
Right.
And I think what we're saying to you guys is, take a look at, based on the discussion we've had, take a look at some formats. You have received what Bob put together, so that obviously we found to be useful, both in terms of the level of detail as well as the functionality, and take a look at how do we then look at past history, revenue and expenditure, look at future. On the revenue, on the expenditure side, Bob already has put something together with those 8 accounts. And then on the revenue side, why don't you take a look at that and come up with some level of, some scheme there.
Are you
And then
talking
we'll talk about it at the next meeting.
Are you talking about going forward on the revenue, or?
Both.
So
Back in.
I am very impressed, by the way, with the level of detail that you all provide. I'm sure it was with a significant aid from Mike and his team. And I think a 4% is a fine estimate of when it comes to expenses one net. And revenue is something I am also curious on, because I believe it is the sort of beginning of the conversation, for at least for me. If we try to think of town government as like a small business that we're customer-based service, we have to think about what we might be bringing in and then what we are providing as a service and where we can find the balance. So I really do have the idea of having, this sheet just to play with, just not to commit, and that's something we would have to be clear with the public, that this is just scenarios and there's levers and there's adjustments and assumptions and whatnot. But I am excited to use this and work with the finance committee and the finance department to be able to have those good discussions, to be able to say, if everything comes the way we want it to come, how could it look? That's a great day. But let's try to bring it down to what we know is true today, and then try to play that game out as well. So,
But it also, to put a little reality, from recent other things floating around, if we were going to cap the operating budget growth at 3.5% with the idea of funding the fire station,
right.
But then you wanted to look at a historical school budget growth number, let's say, 6%. What does that do? And, what does that do to the police and fire budget in the operating budget? Because that's where it's gonna get squeezed.
Right.
That's right.
And
so
the scenario we build has to be useful enough to do that and be
Absolutely.
able to see.
Absolutely, it has to be
How that-
contextualized, and I fully agree. And in fact, I would have to ask Mike for the same sort of information so that I can provide my input to the selectmen and any other group. Like, this is almost the exact same conversation that I would be having
Correct.
shortly.
And that's,
But
that's,
So-
that's what we want to happen.
Yeah.
Correct, and so
Yeah.
it will be happening, I just think it's a way that
Yeah.
we could work together
Right.
to be able to provide
And
what's the
then-
best tool for you, so that you can then provide your input to the community that's not my job.
But so you said earlier and just said, provide, that would be useful to us.
Right,
Part of what I would like to get is a common model that you guys feel is useful, we feel is useful, Board of Selectmen feels is useful.
Sure.
That.
And schools.
It's, in schools.
and schools, and schools.
But so that we're able to operate with one common model.
I agree.
So I don't know that we're the ones who dictate what that model is.
I think
And,
Thursday night
The
will
number of line
probably be-
items and,
Right.
kind of stuff should be a conversation.
That's right, so the budget subcommittee, I think, should contribute to that conversation. That's where those various representatives will come in, as well as myself, and the administration, to be able to come to at least a general understanding. And I don't think it'll be perfect the first year. This will probably take some time, so everyone's kind of comfortable with the model. But yes, I also look forward to that. Everything that you are saying now will directly contribute to that overall understanding from the different parties.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the only thing I don't do right now in my detail is I do not break up the education revenue into detail, and I don't break up the assessments. I just have lump numbers. So what we could do is probably send you something, and then you can say which lines. Because when we do the summary, again, that summary is the same thing as the detail, so you may want to expand that. So we could maybe put something together, and then you can go from there and say, well, we want to expand it, and we put it a different way.
We can always hide and unhide spreadsheet lines. Like, that is not, I think it's just Mike can provide you a great level of detail, and then you can say that's too much or not enough.
So if I may,
Yep.
I've seen a lot of the spreadsheets, and they're incredibly valuable. But you have to go through lots of them, and trying to pull it together, I mean, I do know that you're gonna react and say, well, we've got this one summary, and it's pretty straightforward. We've got to find a way to make sure that the big spreadsheet feeds into that summary real time, like during a year, a fiscal year when we're struggling a little bit maybe, and is also used to project forward. So it's not far off. I mean, I just want to make
No,
sure.
I mean, there's
But
some
it does
details
need
I
to
don't
be-
even include in that, on the detail.
Understand?
I just summary into summary,
Yeah.
and I don't know, that's up to you as to whether, you want to see that piece of it expanded even more, but then, like you said, you may want to isolate, charter school.
All right,
So-
I think, go
Let me
ahead.
just finish. So my point is that I think we need let's call it a quarterly basis, something we can all look at
Okay.
and all of us be able to see and not have to go through 5 spreadsheets to get a feel for. And that's not easy. I will tell you that it feels like it should be easy, but it's not. So I think that's what we're going to, is something that it isn't one page, but it's a few pages with maybe some spreadsheet tables and maybe some graphs, if I can convince Peter to let me do them, on revenues and, the expenditures. Fair enough?
Yeah, I mean, we could put something on the revenue.
look like
and
this?
then-
No.
No, but I think what Ken was pointing out was
They look like this.
What is that?
This is the Arlington,
Right, so I had the good fortune of attending an Association of Town Finance Committees meeting maybe a year or two ago. And the Finance Committee Chairman from Arlington, and I can't recall his name. Yep.
Alan.
So, Mr. Tosti, he presented their Finance Committee budgets overview, and I thought it was very helpful. And so at my initial FinCom meeting where I sat with y'all and you were talking about this modeling and whatnot,
Yep.
that's what it reminded me of, and I looked it up, it's not that hard. And they do that to a degree.
Yep.
So I think this would be a great model, and I'm sure there are other communities that do it, but I know Arlington is successful with this. So I'd like to know what y'all think about this, not necessarily this evening, but what we can do is create a model very similar to this.
that's the revenue you're pointing at right now?
No, this is the full shooting match. This is
Yeah.
the long-range financial projection from 2017.
Yeah.
One pager.
So
Yeah, yeah.
that would be
It's a
another way to
one-pager,
do this. Yeah.
Right, but it may not be the level of detail we want, or maybe too much, whatever. But Mike and I can fill this in for Maynard numbers.
Yep.
And then y'all can say yes or no,
Yep.
we like it or not.
Maybe what we could do is start with the detail, and then we
Okay.
can go to the
So
summary.
I think
Say-
at the risk of we're starting to repeat ourselves, so Revenue
I'm not sure
side.
that's true, but, okay. We're summarizing to make sure we know what the next steps are.
Okay, so revenue side going, from past to forward, expenditure side, we're only talking about going back 4 years, going forward 4 years, and having current year in there. I think what we're saying is go ahead and start to put something together that sort of feels like the discussion that we've had here. And if you want to, send it to me, and we can, have some interim conversations just to sort of see if we're closer. And then maybe we'll put this on the agenda for the next finance committee meeting in a couple weeks.
When is it? Yeah, about when, do you know it? I just,
The 24th.
Yeah, 24th.
September?
Yeah, no, yes.
You're not gonna
I
be here.
won't be here.
Yeah,
But yes, absolutely, you can talk
Yeah.
about it.
We
But
can-
no, in the meantime, now, I just, Mike is not a big department, it's Mike and a couple other people, and he is also in the middle of an audit. So there are some other, as well as Powder Mill Place, there are some other sort of demands that we have. So we should be able to make that 24th, but just want to give the caveat that,
yeah, and I think, whatever state it's in will
Okay.
be a step forward, and
Okay.
we're certainly not gonna be finished
Okay.
at the next meeting. So,
And
If
then,
we can put something together and you could tell us, well, from a detail and summary standpoint, you may say, well, in the detail, we want to have this more details. And you may say, well, in the summary, we want to
Yep,
break up,
Yep.
consolidate.
that sounds great.
I mean, it's not, see, the only thing, Ken brought up a very good point. Right now, when we do local aid, let's say we did an estimate going forward. We do it as a percentage, and it's really based upon combination of things. Is when you start breaking up into details, when you get into the problem, because the one thing, like we talk about the assessment being high, you can't even predict from one year to another. If you look at the numbers on charter school, on revenue, they're all over the place. 1 year it's 40,000, next year it's 150. next
you're
year
talking
It's
about
a-
the tuition reimbursement?
it's a,
Sure. It's
Yeah,
not
I mean,
consistent.
that is a harder number and.
Right, and right now, that's why I never broke it, I break it out, but I don't break it out when we do this.
but if you look at the total tuition out and the stuff in, it's a pretty smooth curve.
You think so?
And it's going up. Yeah,
think
so I.
Well, I mean, the sending tuition is, the state reimbursement for it is what
I'm
varies.
saying the
but-
net, if you look at the
Well, I
net
mean,
between the
a
two.
net, but,
Okay. All right, I'm gonna try to get us to wrap this thing up. Any last comments?
Only
You want
comment.
this for the
Wait,
next
wait,
meeting?
I'm
Oh,
looking down
sorry,
this way.
oh,
I don't know whether I'll have it.
I'll talk anytime.
You have last comment?
Well, let's wrap it up.
Okay, Jill?
I think that the reimbursement might follow some sort of rule where the earlier years you get more money back
They
for
do.
the charge, so I don't know if that's that might be why it
Well, when we
changed.
do the history, we can look at that.
Yeah,
There's also state appropriation for it.
Yes.
okay.
I mean, Ken would probably
Anything
be
else?
more of an expert on that than I would, so.
The only other thing the resource we have is I would be, it's, the next meeting, curious how Lincoln does this. I assume they do some projection stuff too, so.
But we have we had the same conversations that you're having here. It's always a struggle about how to get all the information out there in a concise manner. And I don't know that there is a perfect answer to
Okay.
that. I can go get what they're doing now in Lincoln for you, but it'll just be another method, I suppose. I mean, we got smart people on this board here. We can figure this out.
Well, yeah,
It might be interesting to look a little bit more broadly. I mean, Arlington was a great example.
Yes,
I told Peter I was having serious FinCom webpage envy, taking a look at.
we can't afford that yet. Let's,
There's 21 people on that board, you know that? You know?
Imagine us with 21 people.
I had 82.
Wow.
we're far from our, let's not, it's apples and oranges. But this is a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So we
Right.
we
It's
already
possible.
afford Excel, I can do that.
I
All
agree.
right, anything else?
Positive note, I mean. you
Hold
gotta-
it, Mike.
yeah, all right.
Hold on, anything else?
Not for me.
Okay, Tom?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, PJ. I know what PJ wants to say. She's gonna make a motion here really quick. So. No, we're not ready.
And when do you want this detail.
Well, once you guys sit down,
And we'll-
take a look at what you have on your plate and stuff like that. I mean,
I'll
this
make
is
the
a
time. I have to make the
conversation.
time. There's
It's
no-
not gonna be solved at the next meeting. If we could sort of, if you could at least sort of react. I think one of the big question marks we have is sort of the putting together a model that's sustainable in terms of the data feeding into it. Because like Bob was saying, we need to be able to look at this at each quarter.
Right.
And, I don't want to sit here and put a big burden on someone to convert that data. So in an ideal world, you could sit there and push a button and it would go, but, that probably isn't going to happen. But
Once you do it once, it might be easier
Well-
to do that.
you guys have a conversation and then just, feedback, whatever, okay? All right? So, good. All right, I have a couple quick updates, and I'm gonna, and thank you, by the way, for coming and staying late for this discussion.
Yes, thank you.
Um,
It's a long day.
Yeah, so as Greg had alluded, the town budget subcommittee is meeting this Thursday, so we're meeting on the 13th and on the 24th to get a couple of meetings under our belt and sort of talk about process and what information that we'd have. Not everybody could make one meeting, so that's another purpose for having the multiple meetings, is that way we can. There are some people not available on the 13th and some people not available on the 25th, excuse me, not 24th, 25th. So I'll have a report out to you on that. You all also saw that I started sending out emails to the other town boards and committees about liaisons. I've not gotten through all of them yet. I've done affordable housing, I've done community preservation, economic development committee, fire station building committee, library, school committee, but, there's still a list to go, but I just want to let you know that is a work in progress. At the last Board of Selectmen meeting, they set the license fee for the marijuana licensing. Is it 1,000?
2,000.
2,000? And so they're going to gather data on costs associated with that, so, and they're going forward with a sales tax as well on that. That's
Right.
part of that whole
So,
thing.
so it's a $2,000 license fee.
Yeah.
And then the state allows up to 3% of income or revenue of impact fee. But that has to
Okay.
be tied to justification, which
Right.
we are doing. And we just had a tour of the site the other day, the first proposed site. We've been approached, the town has been approached by a number of potentially retailers coming.
Where
to
is
town.
that?
The one that we saw the other day,
Yeah.
it's at 4 Nason Street. It's the old meeting place shop. It's across from Serendipity.
Yeah.
So, all the board of selectmen have done is allowed myself and the administration to begin drafting and begin negotiations for a host community agreement. But anyways, so we're far from details.
So in addition to the licensing and the impact fee, there's also sales tax.
Well, that's correct.
Yeah,
So
okay, all right.
this is only, that's right.
Yep.
So like a package store, they,
I want revenue.
But the thing, the state hasn't even decided how that's gonna be,
I know.
It's like, we're talking impact fees and everything, but then the talk is, well, it's gonna be treated like a meals tax, where you just,
Yeah.
every quarter you get X amount. No one knows yet.
Yeah.
I mean, forget
okay.
about, what the dollar amount will be.
So my last thing I want to talk about, and I'm just mentioning because we don't have time for a discussion, but I've had it on my list of things to talk about the past several meetings, is I want to create a FinCom advisory subcommittee. The Finance Committee can name subcommittees, and so that is one of the things that is within our power to do. I was thinking that if we had a small advisory committee, we could pull in some people who perhaps don't have time, or at least perceive a particular point in time, that they don't have time to be a full member, but maybe over, it can be sort of a recruiting tool too. Over time, maybe we can pull from that. So we won't have 21 members on our finance committee,
Right.
but maybe we can get up to that through our advisory subcommittee. So I'll have some more ideas to share with you, but I just, if you have any thoughts on what that might look like, I'm just thinking, some extra bodies of people with some expertise, and, they might have some, particular things to say, so. All right, with that, you have anything else? How about you? Joe? Bob?
Nope, I'm good.
Tom? PJ, I think, okay, and second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.